Hi, I'm Jordan Stone with The Good Ride. And did you know that snowboards have different personalities just like people? And trust me, you're not going to like all of them. So think of me as your snowboard matchmaker, and let's see if I can find you something that you like. Today we're going to be talking about the new board in the Jones lineup for 2026, the women's Howler. This was designed with steep terrain in mind. It's super agile and playful if ridden correctly, but it does have a full high setback camber. This makes the rider's experience greatly impacted by the snow conditions, as well as highly dependent on the rider's ability to ride back foot dominant or to be sort of in the back seat of the board. It was tested over multiple days in a variety of conditions in the Pacific Northwest, including a few days at Mission Ridge in early season conditions, as well as in my home mountain, Mount Bachelor, in sort of mid to late spring conditions. I was able to get it on groomed, some perfect groomed, as well as some slush, setup slush, as well as some icy conditions. I rode the board with a directional stance of +18, -9, and set at reference stance of 19.3 with my Trilogy bindings from Union size medium and Dialogue boots from Solomon, men's size 7, women's size 8.
And as you know, we put out honest, objective, unbiased reviews without any brand oversight. And we can do that thanks to the support of shops like Blower Board Shop. They have a strong presence online. So if you want to support The Good Ride and keep objective reviews flowing, check out Blower Board Shop, click through our links, and see if something works for you there.
So I was able to get on 2 different sizes of this board. I was able to get on a 145 here in my home mountain, Mount Bachelor, and 148 at Mission Ridge. Of the 2, my preference was for the larger size as it felt more stable on more variable conditions. The board is available in a 145, a 148, and a larger size of a 151. The waist width is 24.2 for the 145 and 24.5 for the 148. This accommodates a wide range of shoe sizes from 6 to ideally about a size 8, but can go up to a women's size 9 if necessary. If you do have a larger foot size, they do also make a men's Howler with a wider waist width, or you can jump up into that 151, which will allow up to a max of a women's size 10. So the weight range on that 145 is 100 pounds to 150 pound rider. When you jump up to the 148, it just increases that by about 10 pounds. I sit in that about 130, just resting weight, but when I ride, I have a tendency to ride a little bit more powerful. I like a board that sits sort of right in the middle of that weight range. For me, I usually look at about 140, 145 pounds. That 148 accommodates that weight a little bit better. So the Howler has a directional free ride shape that includes pretty significant taper of about 8 millimeters. The Howler is set back on side cut about 2 centimeters and also set back on board at a reference stance of 19.3, about 2 inches. If you do set this back all the way to the furthest inserts, it increases your stance width a little bit of 20.1, but gives you 3.125 inches of extra nose. This is pretty great considering that Jones has, in the past, is notorious for having a really wide reference stance. I'm happy to see that those reference stances are shrinking. They're going a little bit narrower for women riders who don't like to ride shot wide. The camber profile is where the Howler really gets interesting. It's almost a full high camber with early rise in the tip and tail. What is interesting about this camber is that it actually starts in the nose, increases to the midline of the board, and then maintains that high camber all the way to the tail of the board. This essentially means that the peak of the camber extends through the whole back of the board. Instead of being a centered camber, it is set all the way back and has a large peak that needs a lot of power to flex through. This gives the board incredible stability in steep terrain, but can make the board feel a little squirrely if centered or forward on the board, especially in lower angle terrain. The board never really felt catchy on smooth terrain, but the camber did make the board want to come out from behind me if I didn't weight it significantly in that back foot. I did lose control over my turn initiation a couple times because I was trying to figure out where my weight needed to be on the board, causing me to crash on multiple occasions. Due to the complexity of that camber profile, coupled with the stiff flex in the tip and tail, I recommend this board for advanced to expert riders who are looking to get out into steep technical terrain, or are inherently back foot dominant in their riding style, or maybe a little bit more of a heavier rider. When properly weighted, the Howler has exceptional edge hold. I was able to lock it in on cars and maintain hold during a variety of turning radiuses. Again, this was highly dependent on the rider's ability to maintain a back foot dominant riding style. If the weight was transferred forward at all, it kind of reduced the edge hold and changed the board's ability to lock in. I am a middle to front foot dominant rider, so it took a lot of accommodation for me to get that weight into the back and to really experience that edge hold. So let's talk about the flex on this. This board actually has a really interesting flex because of that setback camber. What you're going to find with this board is that it feels pretty flexible through the middle of the board, but if you start to get to the tail of that board, it gets much stiffer. That's because the primary part of this camber is towards the tail of the board. You're gonna get a lot of structure and a lot of stiffness in the tail, whereas that nose, much softer, much surfier. That variation in the stiffness of the board is what gives this board that personality and makes it a very unique ride. This board was a challenging board to butter and to ollie due to the amount of accommodation I had to do to ride this board. When I was able to get the board off the ground, I was challenged again by trying to land back foot dominant. If I was in steep terrain where the back heavy riding is more natural, you're more inclined to be back heavy, I imagine this board would perform wonderfully in butters and air. Not every board is designed for every rider, and I have no shame to admit that this board and I didn't really align when it came to uneven snow. I did not have a great experience when riding this board in soft, uneven snow or on lower angled terrain. Given the shape and the camber profile, the board was kind of hard to control. The board requires a heavy back foot, and when it hits uneven snow, it felt slippery and even a little bit catchy. On many occasions, I found myself trying to pull the board back underneath me, and many times I failed and actually landed on my butt. I've been riding for almost 30 years. I've ridden a lot of snowboards, and it's always a little discouraging to get on a board that makes you feel like you don't know what you're doing. This board does mimic its directional twin counterpart, the Earhart, in construction, and includes a chloride insert in the nose of the board. This increases dampening when charging through uneven snow. I wish that I felt more stable in the terrain and the conditions that I have access to, because I imagine in steep conditions this board would have ridden much better, and I would have felt a little bit more comfortable on it. Once you figure out how this board wants to be ridden, it is a fun turning experience on smooth conditions. This board requires not only an experienced rider, but a self-aware rider as well, because it's a back-heavy ride. If the rider is unable to shift their riding style to be a back-heavy ride and to stay there on the back of the board, it'll actually start to shift forward and try to take over. It's a very interesting challenge of staying in the back, loading that camber in the back foot, while also trying to maintain control and not really shifting your weight forward in the turns like I usually do. When the riding does come together to complement the board, the turning is quick, it's powerful, and it's precise. I was able to lay down a tight, fast carve with ease and maintain it at high speed while doing it. The Howler has mid-level side cut radius of 7.4 on the smaller board, the 145, and 7.6 on the 148. This lends itself to a pretty versatile turning experience. You couple that with a fast centered base that you see on all the Joneses, and the Howler is a fun turning board if you can get over the back leg pump at the end of the run. We receive our boards with factory wax. The Howler felt good on snow as is, but benefited from condition-specific wax. That centered 8000 base thrives when you give it regular maintenance and waxing. I was unable to get this board in true powder conditions as we didn't receive it until mid to late spring, and the early conditions I had at Mission Ridge were just groomed. But given the mild taper and early rise in the nose, as well as the already back dominant camber and the back dominant riding that usually do in powder conditions, I think this board would perform well in deeper conditions, especially in untracked, smooth, steep powder. Again, this board was designed to be a steep terrain board. I got a chance to talk to one of the Jones riders, Marissa, who is a local here at Bend, and asked her about the Howler, and it turns out it's actually her go-to board for steep, consequential terrain. Obviously, the board is designed for specific demographics, and she fits right in as she is a big mountain rider. I acknowledge that my review is limited based on the terrain that I have access to, Mount Bachelor, which is the void of true big mountain lines. I can only speak to the riding experience on mid to low angle terrain, but I imagine a lot of our viewers are probably in a situation where they either don't have access to steep conditions or they're not comfortable going there. So just know that the Howler really does have a specific demographic in mind. I feel very fortunate to have access to next year's board so that I can give you an honest and objective opinion of what I experienced. On paper, the Howler appeared to be a directional version of one of my favorite snowboards to date, the Earhart. In reality, it fell a little short in my ability and my experience to accommodate and navigate the board. This is not to say that the board doesn't have a place in your quiver, but that it's a very specific demographic. It is an aggressive, high camber directional freeride board that requires the rider to be in steep, big mountain terrain or to have a back foot dominant riding style. It was not an easy board to adapt to, especially for someone like myself who doesn't have access to big lines and tends to ride centered even more front foot heavy. When the stars aligned and I was able to ride the board the way it wanted, it really was a fun experience. It turns on a dime and it holds an edge so well I found myself almost kissing the ground. But not every board is made for every rider, and this is a perfect example of that.